Hello, this ERTMS ETCS Learning Module 9 is regarding the design guidance for the ETCS Level 2 trackside entities. The design guidance is divided into several modules. Thereby, this module is the part 2 of the design guidance. The contents of this learning module was prepared by Christopher Coe, and will be presented with the voice-over, generated from the synthetic voice technology. The contents of this learning module continue the Part 1 explanation of the design process for the entities on the trackside. The explanation regarding the RSP, EOA, route categories, MA types, ETCS stop marker, and ETCS location marker is covered in the learning module 8. This learning module 9 covers the trackside entities arrangement, to facilitate the level transition from level NTC color light signaling area to the ETCS Level 2 non-overlay cab signaling area, and vice versa. Non-overlay means no trackside signal, indicator, AWS, or TPWS, when the trains are operating in ETCS Level 2. After this learning module walks through the design processes for level transition, few sections explain the aspect sequence requirements before and after the level transition location, the gradient and speed segments limitation, and the minimum reading distance of the trackside operational signs. The first section will refresh the hypothetical re-meet before explaining the transition area selection process. This hypothetical re-meet is for the purpose of the learning module only. This hypothetical re-meet requires ETCS Level 2 non-overlay, based on the requirements in the CCS-TSI, ETCS Baseline 3, MR2, and the GB Trackside Subsystem Requirements Specification, version 2. The ETCS Level 2 area will be supervised by a single radio block center, and a single computer-based interlocking system. The level transition order from NTC to ETCS transition is to be level 2 only. The existing track layout is to be retained. The shortest block section is to accommodate the longest train. The maximum freight train length is 775 meters. The maximum passenger train length is 400 meters. The maximum permissible speed is 140 km per hour in the ETCS Level 2 area. The 90 miles per hour value will be used for deriving parameters in the code of practice, with the imperial units. The train detection is via the axle counter system. The detection of the berth section and the overlap section is to be separate. The accuracy of Euro Balise fitment location, Q-lock ACC, is 5 meters. There will be no permissive working for the station platform operation. There will be no planned start of mission at the station. Non-provision of track ahead free for EOA with FS mode on approach. No big metal object in the project area. No neutral section or change of traction power in the project area. All level crossings in the project area will be closed. The provision of the 10 meters allowance for the distance between the planned stopping position and the ETCS marker in SR mode operation. The next section of this module explains the initial selection of the ETCS level transition area. The area highlighted in blue color in this diagram is where the trains will be operating in ETCS Level 2, without trackside color light signals. The area highlighted in gray color in this diagram is where the trains will be operating in ETCS Level NTC, with trackside color light signals. The level transition location or border from Level 2 to Level NTC is unlikely coincides with the level transition location or border from Level NTC to Level 2, due to the different requirements. The term transition refers to two types of transition in ETCS: the level transition and the operational mode transition. Therefore, the term level transition is to be used when referring to the change in the type of CCS system. The ideal level transition location is on the plane line area, just before or after the level 2 area, as shown in the red circle in this diagram. The signal in the amber circle of this diagram is the first signal that the train driver will observe in the level NTC color light signaling area, after the ETCS level 2 area. The signal in the green circle of this diagram is the final signal that the train driver will observe in the level NTC color light signaling area, before the ETCS level 2 area. These two signals are the critical reference locations for the design process of the trackside entities to facilitate the ETCS level transition. The next section of this module will walk through the processes to establish the location of the ETCS trackside entities, to facilitate the level transition, from level NTC to level 2. Most entry to the ETCS level 2 non-overlay line will be from the trackside color light signaling line. Therefore, the trackside color light signaling infrastructure requires to provide information or instruction to the train driver and preparing the ETCS on board the train to receive commands from the ETCS radio block center. The final signal in the level NTC area, which is signal S15 in this diagram, is the signal to ensure the train communicates with the radio block center and has the movement authority to enter the ETCS level 2 area, before the signal displays a proceed aspect for the train to enter the ETCS level 2 area. The location of signal S15 is known as the level transition border, marked with the red line in this diagram. The train movement is from left to right in this diagram. Signal S15 requires main proceed aspect approach release from red aspect control (MAR). This signal will only display a proceed aspect after the radio block center has received the movement authority acknowledgement from the train. The acknowledgement proved that the train has established safe radio communication with the radio block center and has received the speed profile and the end of authority destination information. Signal S15 also requires a position light to facilitate the degraded operation through the level transition border. A metric unit km/h speed board and a start of cab signaling board are to be provided at the level transition border location. These boards provide a visual cue to the train driver of the ETCS level 2 transition order location. The level transition border location requires a Balise group to transmit the level transition order command to the ETCS on board. This Balise group is known as the LTO Balise group, or the border Balise group. Signal S15 requires TPWS-TSS fitment, even the signal does not qualify for TPWS fitment. The TPWS-TSS will initiate the emergency brake of the non-ETCS train, or the non-authorized train, when attempting to pass signal S15. The train in communication with the radio block center only changes to level 2 and full supervision mode when the train is above the LTO Balise group and has received the LTO command. The ideal block section length from the final signal in the level NTC area to the first ETCS stop marker is the distance with at least 5 seconds distance of the maximum operational speed and the service braking distance. The 5 seconds is the time window for the train driver to acknowledge the level 2 transition order. When the ETCS on board has not received the acknowledgement action from the train driver via the DMI, the ETCS on board will initiate service brake to stop the train. The service brake will be released upon acknowledgement from the train driver. The location of the session establishment Balise group is relative to the first caution signal of the level transition border signal. The first caution signal for signal S15 in this diagram is signal S14. The distance from the session establishment Balise group to signal S14 requires 40 seconds for the ETCS on board to establish a communication session with the radio block center during the normal operation with tolerance of minor irregular situation. The 40 seconds duration allows the ETCS on board to re-establish the communication session with the radio block center, when the first attempt was unsuccessful. After 40 seconds, the ETCS on board will consider the session establishment process is unsuccessful. In addition to the 40 seconds, the distance between the session establishment Balise group and signal S14 also requires to accommodate the MA request time, system processing time, message transmission time, and the readable distance of signal S14. The distance between the session establishment Balise group and signal S14 allows the train to maintain maximum permissible speed on approach to the signal S15 during normal operation. This means, the train driver will observe green aspect on approach to the level transition border during normal operation. The location of the network registration Balise group is relative to the session establishment Balise group. The distance between the Balise groups requires 40 seconds for the ETCS on board to register with the GSMR network, if the train has not registered with the GSMR network during the journey towards the session establishment Balise group. The 40 seconds duration allows the ETCS on board to retry the network registration, when the first attempt was unsuccessful. After 40 seconds, the ETCS on board will consider the network registration process is unsuccessful. The final signal of the level NTC area, for the movement from right to left of the layout, as shown in this diagram, is the existing signal CF1806, in the red circle. This signal is the RSP for authorizing the train movement towards the Micklefield Junction, and converges with the ETCS Level 2 line. The location of signal CF1806 is the level NTC to level 2 transition border, for the train path indicates with the green arrow, that is up direction, from right to left of this diagram. The first cautionary signal, for the final signal in level NTC area, is signal GW1812. This signal displays double yellow aspect, when signal CF1806 displays red aspect. Signal GW1812 is the reference location, to establish the ETCS trackside entity's location on the approach side of the level transition border. Changes to the appearance and control of the existing signal CF1806 will be required, to provide position light and the MAR control. The red aspect is released after the confirmation from the radio block center, rather than the conventional method, via the train detection section occupied status. Signal CF1806 still requires AWS and TPWS fitment. If the existing signal CF1806 does not have TPWS fitment, TPWS TSS will be required. A Balise group is required at the location coincides with the signal CF1806. The primary function of the Balise group is for transmitting the level transition order, LTO command, and the national values data. TPWS fitment is required for signal CF1806. The current code of practice for TPWS allows the TPWS TSS trigger loop location, no greater than 2 meters on the approach side of the signal, and no greater than 6 meters beyond the signal. The minimum clearance distance, between the center line of TPWS TSS loops, and the Euro Balise is approximately 3.5 meters. The 3.5 meters is the summation of the approximate 0.5 meters Euro Balise size, 2 meters clearance, and 1 meter TPWS loop size. Therefore, the practical location for the TPWS TSS is beyond signal CF1806. The train with ETCS on board without movement authority will still be tripped by the LTO Balise group. The distance between the PIG-1 Balise and the signal CF1806 is 0 meter. The distance between the PIG-1 Balise and the TPWS-TSS trigger loop leading edge is 3.5 meters. The minimum distance between the PIG-0 Balise and the PIG-1 Balise is 3 meters. The maximum distance between the PIG-0 Balise and the PIG-1 Balise is 12 meters. The maximum distance between the TPWS-OSS trigger loop and signal CF1806 is 450 meters. A 140 km/h speed indicator, and a start-of-cab signaling board, will be required at the level transition border location coincides with signal CF1806. There will be two types of route category for signal CF1806, main class and PO-SAR class routes. The main class route allows the radio block center to authorize the movement authority with full supervision mode for the train to pass the level transition border during normal operation. Signal CF1806 will display either green, yellow, or double yellow aspect during normal operation. The PO-SAR, Proceed on-Site Authority class route, allows the radio block center to authorize the movement authority with on-site mode for the train to pass the level transition border during degraded operation. Signal CF1806 will display red aspect and the flashing position light during degraded operation. The theoretical safe overrun distance based on 12% G stopping distance, beyond the TPWS-TSS trigger loop, will be required to ensure the train tripped by the TPWS, or the LTO Balise group, is stopped within the safe zone. The minimum distance of the two block sections, beyond the LTO Balise group, or the signal CF1806, is the distance to allow 5 seconds level transition acknowledgement, and the signaling braking distance after the 5 seconds elapsed. The signaling braking distance derived from the code of practice is typically more generous than the stopping distance, calculated by the ETCS on board. Suppose the distance of the two block sections beyond the LTO Balise group is less than the stopping distance calculated by the ETCS on board. The ETCS on board will initiate the service brake when the train passes the LTO Balise group at the maximum permissible speed during normal operation. Therefore, an adequate distance beyond the LTO Balise group is essential to avoid undesirable brake intervention at the level transition border. The distance of the two block sections greater than the signaling braking distance is also consistent with the meaning of the double yellow aspect indicates on the signal CF1806. The minimum distance of the block section, beyond the LTO Balise group, or the signal CF1806, is the 50% of the signaling braking distance for the 4-aspect sequence. The 50% of the signaling braking distance requirement, for the block section beyond the single yellow aspect, differs from the conventional trackside signaling requirement. The conventional trackside signaling requirement only requires 33% of the signaling braking distance. The train driver with defensive driving technique would have reduced the speed when approaching signal CF1806 displaying single yellow aspect, and expecting the remaining distance beyond the signal is 33% of the signaling braking distance. Therefore, the speed of the train upon passing the LTO Balise group based on the remaining 33% distance is lower than the speed value calculated by the ETCS on board based on the remaining 50% distance. The 50% of the signaling braking distance provides an adequate distance beyond the LTO Balise group to avoid undesirable brake intervention by the ETCS on board at the level transition border. After the location for the LTO Balise group and the signal CF1806 is established, and meets all the requirements beyond the level transition border, and no change to the existing signals in the level NTC area, the Balise groups on the approach side of the level transition border will be relative to the first cautionary signal of signal CF1806. The first cautionary signal for signal CF1806 is signal GW1812. The distance between the session establishment Balise group (SEBG) and signal GW1812 is the summation of the readable distance for signal GW1812, the MA request time, the typical radio block center message processing time, the message transmission time, the typical ETCS onboard response time, and the 40 seconds allowance for the ETCS onboard to establish communication session with the radio block center. There will be no provision of the level transition announcement, LTA Balise group for this layout, because the level transition announcement message will be transmitted from the radio block center to the ETCS on board, as part of the movement authority message. There will also be no provision of the second session establishment Balise group, beyond the South Milford station in this layout, because the start of mission is not a routine procedure at the station. The location of the Network Registration Balise Group, NRBG, is relative to the Session Establishment Balise Group, SEBG, with the distance to allow 40 seconds GSMR network registration process. There will be only one NRBG for this layout, because there is no converging tracks between the NRBG and the SEBG. After the distances for the NRBG and the SEBG are established, the provision of level NTC to level 2, via level 1 transition can be finalized. There will be no provision of the ETCS level transition, from level NTC to level 1, then subsequently to level 2, because the distances for the NRBG and the SEBG meet the minimum requirements. The interlocking system that controls the color light signal CF1806 will only display proceed aspect on the signal, after the radio block center has confirmed that the ETCS on board has acknowledged the movement authority, and the level transition announcement message. The radio block center will not transmit movement authority and level transition announcement message to the train with national system identity, NID, NTC, value equals to 21. This train or the train driver is not authorized to operate in the level 2 area. Signal CF1806 will remain in red aspect when the non-authorized train approaches the level 2 area. The train is authorized to operate in level 2 area has national system identity, NID, NTC, equal to 20. The driver machine interface DMI indicates L2/NTC when the train is in the level NTC area. The train is not authorized to operate in level 2 area has national system identity, NID, NTC, equal to 21. The driver machine interface DMI indicates TPWS when the train is in the level NTC area. The NID, NTC, 21 train cannot transition into level 2 full supervision mode when passing the LTO Balise group. The ETCS on board will initiate the emergency brake when received the LTO command from the Balise group, because the ETCS on board does not have the movement authority message from the radio block center. The next section of this module will walk through the processes to establish the location of the ETCS trackside entities, to facilitate the level transition, from level 2 to level NTC. Most ETCS level 2 non-overlay line will connect with the trackside color light signaling line. Therefore, the train in ETCS level 2 operation will exit the ETCS level 2 area at some point of the journey. The ETCS trackside entities are required to facilitate the level transition from level 2 to level NTC. The final RSP in the level 2 area in this diagram is S22. The first signal in the level NTC area in this diagram is S23. The level transition order location is between S22 and S23, marked with the red line in this diagram. The block section from S22 to S23 is the exclusion zone for the permanent speed restriction deceleration, the neutral section, the station, and the level crossing, to avoid the uncertainty of the speed at the level transition border. The first and the second signals, beyond the level transition border in the level NTC area, are the signals that do not qualify for TPWS/OSS fitment. This requirement is to avoid the TPWS/OSS set speed potentially contradicts with the calculated speed by the ETCS on board, when the end of authority is signal S23 or signal S24. The level transition order, LTO Balise group, and the end of cab signaling board will be required at the level transition border. The location of the LTO Balise group requires to provide 8 seconds minimum reading time for the signal beyond the LTO Balise group. The distance for 8 seconds minimum reading time provides adequate time for the train driver to observe the first signal in the level NTC area, to interpret the indication, to assimilate the information, and to decide the action. The end of cab signaling board provides a visual cue to the train driver of the ETCS level NTC transition order location. The train driver will be requested to acknowledge the level NTC transition on the approach to the level transition border. The train driver can acknowledge the level NTC transition request before the level transition border, or no later than 5 seconds after the level transition border. The level transition order is also in the announcement message from the radio block center. In the scenario when the LTO Balise group is missed or faulty, the ETCS on board will still perform the level transition after the estimated front end of the train has reached the LTO location. The imperial unit (MPH) speed board will be required beyond the level transition border to remind the train driver regarding the maximum permissible speed value in the level NTC area. The maximum permissible speed value will not be indicated on the driver machine interface (DMI) when the ETCS onboard changes from level 2 to level NTC. The distance between the imperial unit speed board and the LTO Balise group to provide 4 seconds minimum reading time for the speed board. The onboard specific transmission module (STM) is the interface between the ETCS on board and the AWS or TPWS receiver on board. The STM requires 5 seconds to change from the hot standby state to the data available state after the ETCS on board has received the level transition order command from the LTO Balise group. The STM cannot provide any information from the AWS or TPWS receiver on board before the data available state. Therefore, the 5-second zone after the LTO Balise group is the exclusion zone for Trackside AWS or TPWS. The level transition announcement can be transmitted either from the radio block center or from the Balise group. Therefore, the LTA Balise group is optional when the LTA is transmitted from the radio block center. The LTA will be included in the movement authority message for the train to pass the RSPS-22. The distance between the LTA location and the LTO location requires to provide 10 seconds for the specific transmission module (STM) to change from cold standby state to the hot standby state. For the movement from left to right of the layout in this diagram, the train in ETCS Level 2 will either continue in Level 2 area on the top line, or exit the Level 2 area on the bottom line. The Level 2 to Level NTC transition will be required, for the train path indicates with the green arrow, that is down direction, from left to right of this diagram. The level transition border location will be between the final RSPY8200 in the Level 2 area and the first signal CF1817 in the Level NTC area. Before finalizing the level transition border location, if the location is likely to be on the approach side of the junction, the practical solution is to extend the Level 2 area beyond the CF1817 location. The first signal CF1817, and the second signal CF1821, in the level NTC area do not qualify for TPWSOSS fitment. Therefore, the location on the approach side of signal CF1817 is a suitable location for the level transition. The location for the LTO Balise group and the end of cab signaling board will be relative to signal CF1817. The end of cab signaling board coincides with the PIG1 Balise of the LTO Balise group. The minimum distance from the PIG1 Balise to signal CF1817 is the distance for 8 seconds minimum reading time of signal CF1817. The maximum distance from the PIG1 Balise to signal CF1817 is the maximum readable distance of signal CF1817. Upon the train driver passes the level transition border, the signal CF1817 will be visible to the train driver. The minimum distance between the PIG0 Balise and the PIG1 Balise is 3 meters. The maximum distance between the PIG0 Balise and the PIG1 Balise is 12 meters. The LTA Balise group is optional. When the level transition announcement location is transmitted from the radio block center to the ETCS on board. The level transition announcement location is relative to the LTO location. The minimum distance between the LTA location and the LTO location is the distance for 10 seconds. The minimum distance is the same, whether the LTA location is transmitted from the radio block center, or from the Balise group. The zone between the level transition announcement and signal CF1817 is the exclusion zone for speed reduction, associated with the permanent speed restriction. This requirement is to minimize the workload for the train driver during normal operation, when preparing for the change from cab signaling to trackside color light signaling. For this layout, the permissible speed is higher, after the level transition border. Therefore, there is no speed reduction towards and after the level transition border. There is no AWS inductor or TPWS loops, within 5 seconds distance, beyond the level transition border. Speed indicator will be provided relative to the LTO Balise group. The minimum distance is the distance for 4 seconds minimum reading time of the speed indicator. The maximum distance is the maximum readable distance of the speed indicator. When the train driver passes the level transition border, the speed indicator will be visible to the train driver, and reminding the train driver of the maximum miles per hour speed value in the level NTC area. The level transition border location is known as the limit of authority, LOA, from the movement authority perspective. LOA means the target speed is not zero at the end of the route under ETCS supervision. The ETCS on board in full supervision mode will supervise the train speed from the RSP to the LOA. The radio block center will have information from the interlocking system regarding the route status beyond signal CF1817. The radio block center will transmit the permitted speed at the LOA to the ETCS on board, based on the route status beyond signal CF1817. The GB ETCS specification requires the confidence interval no greater than 100 meters, within the 600 meters distance on the approach to the LOA. To achieve the confidence interval of 100 meters or less, one single Balise or a Balise group will be required, within the 800 meters distance on the approach side of the LOA. The Balise group for RSPY8200 is within 800 meters distance on the approach side of the LOA. Therefore, additional Balise for resetting the confidence interval is not essential for this layout. The next section of this module will explain the aspect sequence that the train driver will observe when approaching the level NTC to level 2 transition border. When the EOA is at the end of the 3 block sections, beyond the final signal in the level NTC 4 aspect signaling area, the final signal will indicate green aspect. The green aspect of the 4 aspect sequence provides information to the train driver that there are more than 2 block sections beyond the signal. The 3 signals in this diagram will only indicate green aspect after all the route conditions satisfied, and the radio block center confirmed the ETCS on board acknowledged the movement authority. The train driver will observe green aspects on the approach to the level transition border during normal operation. The ETCS on board will allow the ETCS train to enter level 2 with maximum line speed. When the EOA is at the end of the 2 block sections, beyond the final signal in the level NTC 4 aspect signaling area, the final signal will indicate double yellow aspect. The double yellow aspect of the 4 aspect sequence provides information to the train driver that the EOA is at the end of the 2 block sections beyond the signal, and to expect speed reduction during the journey beyond the final signal. The final signal CF1806 in this diagram will only indicate double yellow aspect after all the route conditions satisfied, and the radio block center confirmed the ETCS on board acknowledged the movement authority. The train driver will observe green aspects and then double yellow aspect on the approach to the level transition border during normal operation, as shown in this diagram. The ETCS on board will allow the ETCS train to enter level 2 with maximum line speed, because the commencement of the speed reduction towards the EOA is beyond the signal CF1806. The ETCS driver machine interface (DMI) will provide the remaining distance to the end of the movement authority when the commencement of the speed reduction is required. When the EOA is at the end of the block section, beyond the final signal in the level NTC 4 aspect signaling area, the final signal will indicate single yellow aspect. The single yellow aspect of the 4 aspect sequence provides information to the train driver that the EOA is at the end of the block section beyond the signal. The final signal CF1806 in this diagram will only indicate single yellow aspect after all the route conditions satisfied, and the radio block center confirmed the ETCS on board acknowledged the movement authority. The train driver will observe green aspect, double yellow aspect and single yellow aspect on the approach to the level transition border during normal operation, as shown in this diagram. The ETCS on board will initiate service brake or emergency brake if the ETCS train enters level 2 with the speed greater than the speed calculated by the ETCS on board, for the remaining stopping distance. Upon passing the level transition border or the final signal CF1806, the train driver has reduced the speed of the ETCS train significantly lower than the maximum line speed, to avoid brake intervention from the ETCS on board. The ETCS driver machine interface (DMI) will provide the remaining distance to the end of the movement authority upon passing the level transition order Balise group. When the radio block center has not received the movement authority acknowledgement from the ETCS on board, the final signal in the level NTC area will indicate red aspect, regardless the number of block sections available beyond the signal. The train driver will observe double yellow aspect and single yellow aspect on the approach to the level transition border, as shown in this diagram. The train driver requires to stop the train on approach side of the final signal CF1806. The signal will indicate a proceed aspect as soon as the interlocking system has confirmation from the radio block center that the ETCS on board has acknowledged the level 2 movement authority. The ETCS driver machine interface (DMI) will provide information to the train driver whether the ETCS on board has radio communication session with the radio block center. However, the DMI does not indicate the movement authority status beyond the final signal to the train driver, whilst the ETCS on board is still in level NTC. The next section of this module will explain the aspect sequence that the train driver will observe after the level 2 to level NTC transition border. The aspect indication of the first signal beyond the level 2 area is relative to the aspect sequence beyond the first signal. The status of the ETCS level 2 movement authority towards the level transition border has no effect to the first signal beyond the level transition border. The first signal can indicate green aspect. Even the ETCS on board does not have movement authority to approach the LOA. LOA means the target speed is not zero at the end of the route under the ETCS supervision. However, the aspect sequence beyond the level transition border has an effect to the maximum permitted speed authorized by the ETCS on board, on approach to the level transition border. When the first signal CF1817 beyond the level transition border indicates green aspect, the ETCS on board allows maximum line speed on approach to the LOA, which is the location of the level transition order Balise group. When the first signal CF1817, beyond the level transition border indicates double yellow aspect, the ETCS on board still allows maximum line speed on approach to the LOA. This is because the commencement of the speed reduction for stopping on the approach side of the signal CF1823 in the level NTC area is beyond the first signal CF1817. When the first signal CF1817, beyond the level transition border indicates single yellow aspect, the permitted speed at the LOA or the level transition border is lower than the maximum line speed. The ETCS on board supervises the speed reduction on approach to the LOA, allowing the speed that the train driver can stop on the approach side of the second signal CF1821, after the level transition border. The train driver is responsible for supervising the train speed after the level transition border. When the first signal CF1817, beyond the level transition border indicates red aspect, the permitted speed at the LOA or the level transition border is significantly lower than the maximum line speed. The ETCS on board supervises the speed reduction on approach to the LOA, allowing the speed that the train driver can stop on the approach side of the first signal CF1817, after the level transition border. The train driver is responsible for supervising the train speed, and stopping the train on the approach side of the first signal, after the level transition border. The next section of this module will explain the gradient and speed segments limitation for the ETCS Level 2 area. The number of gradient segments allocation for the ETCS Level 2 area is to be within the system limitation of the ETCS. The maximum gradient segments for the radio block center movement authority message is 32 segments. The ETCS on board can store up to 50 gradient segments data from the movement authority messages. The expression of the gradient on the ETCS DMI differs from the conventional signaling design practice, or the gradient information depicts on the signaling drawing. The example in this diagram shows the gradient segment for 1 in 500 rising, depicts by the signaling drawing symbol, will be indicated as 2 in 1000 rising, on the ETCS DMI. 1 in 45 falling on the signaling drawing symbol, will be 22 in 1000 falling, on the ETCS DMI. 1 in 200 rising on the signaling drawing symbol, will be 5 in 1000 rising, on the ETCS DMI. The gradient information on the ETCS DMI refers to a unit of fall or rise for every 1000 meters. The signaling drawing symbol refers to 1 vertical unit of fall or rise over the horizontal unit. Therefore, data interpretation or exchanging information during the design process requires consideration of the differences in the expression of the gradient. The number of speed segments limitation in the ETCS is similar to the gradient segments limitation. The maximum speed segments for the radio block center movement authority message is 32 segments. The ETCS on board can store up to 50 speed segments data from the movement authority messages. The speed segments for a movement authority is highly unlikely to exceed the system limitation. This is the final section of this learning module. The minimum reading distance of the ETCS Level 2 trackside entity is derived from the deceleration distance, or the braking distance, rather than the reading time. However, the minimum reading distance requirement for the operational signage to support, or related to the level NTC operation, is derived from the minimum reading time. The km/h metric unit speed sign requires minimum reading distance of 100 meters. The speed sign is only observed by the train driver during non-full supervision operation, when the ceiling speed is set to 40 km/h. Therefore, the km/h metric unit speed sign is not essential, where the speed is greater than the ceiling speed in the ETCS Level 2 area. During ETCS Level 2 full supervision operation, all the permitted speeds of the movement authority will be indicated on the driver-machine interface (DMI). The miles/hour speed sign beyond the level transition border requires minimum reading distance to provide minimum reading time of 4 seconds. The minimum reading distance of the start of cab signaling and the end of cab signaling signs at the level transition order location require to provide minimum reading time of 4 seconds. The ETCS Level 2 area requires double-sided line-side location marker every 500 meters, and facing the direction of the train movement. The appearance of the line-side location marker is the amber and black color sign, with the longitudinal kilometers and half-kilometer values. The line-side location marker is required on both sides of the railway line, where there are more than 2 tracks. The purpose of the line-side location marker is for supporting safety-critical communication between the train driver and the signaller during degraded or emergency operations. The minimum reading distance is 50 meters. This brings us to the end of the ERTMS ETCS Learning Module 9. In summary, this module provides guidance and information to establish the level transition order location and trackside entities, for the level transition from level NTC to level 2, and from level 2 to level NTC. This module also shows the color light signals in the ETCS level transition area, requires additional requirements, when comparing with the requirements for the color light signaling area without ETCS. Thank you for your interest and attention. Goodbye, and have a good day.